When I opened my eyes, I no longer heard the northern wind scraping against the rotten straw mats of the ruined temple. I no longer felt that dull knife twisting through my belly, cutting me open inch by inch. Instead, I was sitting in the main room of the eldest branch of Yongchang Marquis manor, seated on a huanghuali chair carved with luan birds. In my hand was a cup of warm snowfinch tea. The lid of the blue and white porcelain cup brushed lightly against the rim, making a crisp, delicate sound. It was too real, so real, that for a moment, I couldn't tell whether I had truly returned to the world of the living, or whether my resentment after death had been so deep that my wandering soul had drifted back to this manor, the manor that devoured people whole and left no bones behind. "Young madam," Yinju said softly from beside the screen. Mother Qin from second young madam's courtyard came again. Yinju was my personal maid. She stood there with her brows drawn tight, her face filled with indignation she could barely hold back. She said the second branch is still short 5 taels of silver for this month's allowance. Second young Madame Lu's meaning is that second master will be visiting the Shaoqing of Honglu Temple next month, so the expenses can't be delayed. The moment I heard those names, Liu Shi, Pei Chengyin, the public accounts, my hand trembled, thin ripples spread across the tea in my cup. Warmth flowed along my fingertips, but it could not drive away the cold buried deep in my bones, the cold left behind by that abandoned courtyard in my previous life. I slowly raised my eyes and looked at Yinju. Her face was still young and whole. Her eyes were bright and clear. There was still a trace of blunt sincerity between her brows, the kind that had not yet been worn down by the cruelty of the world. And suddenly, I remembered the last time I had seen her in my previous life. Back then, she had knelt outside the side courtyard, crying until her voice was hoarse, begging old Madame Zhang to let her come inside and bring me just one bowl of hot porridge. But Mother Qin had dragged her away and ordered her beaten 20 times with a plank. After that, I never even learned where she had been sent. I stared at Yinju for a long time before I finally understood. I was alive. I had not died in that desolate side courtyard, cold as an ice cellar. On the day of the winter solstice, the white-eyed wolves of the Pei family had starved me to death, all because they wanted to save one more mouthful of food for themselves. In my previous life, I had poured my heart and soul into this crumbling Marquis manor. The Pei family's eldest and second branches, every one of them, from old Madame Zhong, who ate vegetarian meals and chanted Buddhist prayers, to the arrogant Pei Yushu, spent my Kuei family's money without shame. Yet behind my back, they cursed me for smelling of copper and mocked me as nothing more than a merchant's daughter. Box after box of the 72 sets of red wedding trousseau my Qinghe Cui family had prepared for me had been carried out to fill the bottomless pit of Yongchang Marquis manor. Pei Zhiheng's official career had risen smoothly because of it. Pei Chengyin had been able to study for the imperial examinations because of it. Pei Yushu had married with glory because of it. Old Madame Zhang's birthday banquets had been grand because of it. And Lu Wenyin had been able to act like a proper noble madam in front of the capital's titled ladies only because of the money my parents had earned through years of hardship in business. But in the end, when disaster came to the Cui family and I went to Pei Zhiheng begging for help, he held his beloved cousin in his arms and looked down at me from above. "You reek of copper," he said. "Even when your family falls, you still carry the calculations of a merchant." Old Madame Zhang was even more ruthless. Using the excuse that I was childless and therefore unfilial, she stripped me of the authority to manage the household and had me thrown into a side courtyard. Pei Yushu stood outside the door, wearing a brocade dress bought with my dowry money. She smiled and said, Since sister-in-law is a merchant's daughter, you must understand business best. Giving you a bowl of rice today will only cost the manor another coin tomorrow. It's better for you to leave earlier. At least that will save the household some expenses. In the end, not one of them was willing to give me even a mouthful of leftovers. That was how I died on the winter solstice. Before my death, snow blew in through the broken window and fell onto my face. In that final moment, I remembered the day I had married into the Pei family. My mother had held my hand, her eyes red with tears, and said, "Lingyi, the Marquis manor is a noble family, but if you ever suffer there, come home." But in my previous life, I had been too foolish. I had always believed that once a woman married, she should follow her husband. I had believed that if I endured long enough, I would win my husband's respect, my mother-in-law's affection, and peace for the family. Only when I was dying did I understand endurance cannot feed wolves. Virtue cannot buy sincerity. Now, reborn into this life, I looked down at the embroidered jacket on my body, patterned with delicate flowering branches, and slowly smiled. The laugh was soft but cold as a blade being drawn from its sheath. The second branch wants 20 taels to buy fish? I slowly skimmed the foam from the surface of the tea and took a sip. The tea carried a clear fragrance with a faint sweetness on the tongue. This time, it was their turn to experience life without the Kuei family's money supporting them. "Yinju," I said, "go and bring me the key to the storehouse." Yinju froze for a moment, then hurriedly said, "Young madam, you can't keep filling their holes anymore. Last month, second master went out drinking, and the bill was charged to the public accounts. But in the end, you paid for it with your own private money. The dowry master and madam prepared for you can't withstand this kind of waste." "Who said I'm giving them money?" I put down the teacup and looked up at her. "Go, open the storehouse. Then send word to the 20 servants my brother left at the estate outside the capital. Tell them to bring ox carts and wait at the back gate in half an hour." Yinju stared at me, stunned. Then, little by little, her eyes began to shine. "Madam, you mean—" I looked at the half-withered crabapple tree outside the window and said calmly, "Move everything that belongs to the Kui family back to the Kui family." Half an hour later, the corridor in the northwest corner of the Marquis manor was silent as death. I stood before my private treasury and looked at the rows of large red lacquered chests, each sealed with the Kui family mark. Inside were red gold enamel headpieces, whole bolts of Sichuan brocade, century-old ginseng and deer antlers, pearls from the East China Sea, damask fabrics woven south of the Yangtze River, and 300,000 taels in banknotes at the bottom of the chests. In my previous life, I had taken these things out one by one. They had become the Pei family's dignity, Pei Jihing's reputation, Pei Chengyin's future, and Pei Yushu's dowry. Now, it was time for them to go home. The leading servant was Cui Liu, one of my elder brother Cui Huayan's trusted men. He looked at me with obvious confusion, but still bowed respectfully. "What are your orders, madam?" I pointed to the chests in the storehouse. My voice was calm. "Count everything inside. Gold, silver, jade, silk, satin, anything that can be taken away, load it all onto the carts. Send everything back overnight to my brother's Hangfeng warehouse in the western part of the city." Cui Liu was startled and looked up at me. I continued, "As for the empty chests, lock them as they were. Fill them with bricks and broken tiles. Add scrap iron if needed. The weight must be exactly the same as before. Then put the seals back in place. No flaws." A flash of shock passed through Cui Liu's eyes, but he was a man trained by the Kui family, and very quickly he lowered his head and accepted the order. "Yes, madam. The servants of the Kui family knew rules better than anyone. They knew the discipline of the trading world. When moving valuables, the key was to be quiet. steady, and never chaotic. For 2 full hours, the 72 sets of dowry were emptied completely. The heavy gold and silver were wrapped layer after layer in soft cloth, placed into ordinary-looking grain sacks, mixed among charcoal carts and rice carts, and quietly transported out through the back gate of the Marquis manor. The large red lacquered chests that had once held rare treasures were filled instead with bricks, broken tiles, and scrap iron. I watched with my own eyes as the final chest was locked again and resealed with the Kui family mark. Only then did the suffocating resentment I had, carried across 2 lifetimes, loosen slightly in my chest. Madame Yin Zhu reminded me in a low voice, "There are still the account books. Public accounts, of course, should follow public rules." I returned to the main room and took out the 2 ledgers hidden in the secret compartment. One was the true public ledger. It stated clearly that Yongchang Marquis Manor had long been nothing but an empty shell. The harvest from its estates had decreased year after year, while the expenses of every courtyard flowed away like water. At present, the public accounts held only 112 taels of silver. The other was the false ledger I had created in my previous life, using the Kui family's money to cover their shame and paint over their decay. In that false account, the Marquis manor looked prosperous year after year. Everything appeared dignified and decent, as if it were still a glorious century-old noble family of the capital. Looking at that false ledger now, I only found my past self laughable. For the sake of preserving my husband's so-called family dignity, I had personally covered their rotting flesh with my own hands. In this life, I would not cover it anymore. I threw the false ledger into the brazier. Flames curled upward. The pages crackled softly. Ink marks twisted in the firelight before finally turning into a handful of ash. Yinju stood nearby, her eyes red. "Madam," she whispered, "you've finally figured it out." I looked at the brazier and said softly, "Yes, I've figured it out. This Marquis Manor was not a home. It was a cave. Whoever filled it would die inside it." Early the next morning, the sky had only just begun to brighten, and the second branch's courtyard gate had not even opened, when Mother Chin was already waiting outside my courtyard. This old servant greets young madam. Mother Chin bent her knees with a smile on her face, but every word she spoke carried thorns. Second young madam waited all night yesterday, but she never saw Miss Yinju bring over the money. Second master is leaving early this morning. Matters involving Honglu Temple cannot be delayed. Young madam should still think of the dignity of the scholars in our Marquis manor. In my previous life, the moment I heard the words dignity of the Marquis manor, I would have panicked and immediately ordered someone to fetch the money. But now I simply sat before the dressing mirror and let Yinju arrange my hair, not even lifting my eyelids. What Mother Chin says is true. The dignity of scholars is indeed important. I looked at her through the bronze mirror, my voice gentle. It's just unfortunate that I checked the public accounts last night and found them truly difficult. Since second uncle must clear the path to Honglu Temple, perhaps second uncle should pay those 20 taels himself. If that isn't enough, there is still some old rice left in the public storehouse for winter. Why don't you carry 2 loads of it over and present it to the Shao Qing? Mother Chin's expression changed at once. "Young madam, what are you saying? Second master is doing this for the future of the entire Marquis manor. Besides, the household has always been under young madam's management. In the past, never mind 20 taels, even 200 taels would only require 1 word from young madam. Why are you being so harsh to our second branch today? Mother Chin, mind your words." I turned around with just the right amount of helplessness on my face. In the past, there was still room in the public accounts, But this year, disaster struck the north, and the rents from several of the Marquis manor's estates have not been collected. As the eldest daughter-in-law, I worried so much over the household's livelihood that I stayed awake half the night. If you don't believe me, we can invite mother-in-law and second young madam over. We'll lay out the account books and calculate everything clearly, item by item. Mother Chin choked on my words. How could she dare alarm old Madame Zhang? Old Madame Zhang had always been the kind of person who enjoyed the benefits, but never touched the troublesome details. She only wanted money. She never wanted to dirty her hands with accounts. Mother Chin gritted her teeth and snorted. Since young madam says so, this old servant will go back and report to second young madam. I only hope that if second master's future is delayed, eldest young master won't regret it. Seeing Mother Chin leave in anger, Yin Zhu walked over worriedly. Young madam, once she goes back, second young madam will definitely speak ill of you in front of old madam. Then old madam will blame you for poor household management. Blame me? I smoothed the folds of my sleeve, my eyes cold. I'm afraid she won't. If Lu Wenyin had the ability, she could take the stewardship herself. In my previous life, I had treated the authority to manage the household as if it were a treasure. I was terrified of making even the slightest mistake and bringing shame to the Kui family. Now I understood. In Yangchang Marquis manor, whoever managed the household was the greatest fool under heaven. The public accounts had long been hollowed out by the second branch and the Zhang family. Pei Chengyin gambled, drank, and socialized outside. Pei Yushu cared only about clothes and jewelry. Old Madame Zhong wanted to maintain a reputation for charity and virtue during every festival. Pei Zhiheng wanted to make friends with noble colleagues. Everything required money. Without the Kuei family pouring wealth into this pit like an endless stream of grain, I wanted to see how many days they could survive. Just as I was thinking this, steady footsteps sounded outside. Calm, but carrying a hint of arrogance, the curtain was lifted, and Pei Zhiheng walked in. He wore a dark blue robe that had been washed until it had faded slightly. The material was ordinary, but on him it still looked neat and straight. Combined with that handsome, refined face of his, he did indeed possess the bearing of a young gentleman from an aristocratic family. In my previous life, I had been deceived by this appearance of his and by all his talk of sages and classics. I had believed he was noble. I had believed he was upright. I had believed he was someone worth entrusting my life to. Only later did I learn that no matter how many books some people read, they still cannot hide the selfishness and coldness rooted deep in their bones. Lingyi, Pei Zhiheng said, walking in, why is there such a commotion from the second branch so early in the morning? He came over, picked up my teacup from the table as if by habit, and took a sip. Then he frowned slightly. This tea is a little cold. Then he continued, I heard Mother Chin complaining under the 5th corridor. She said you withheld the money second brother needed for gifts. Second brother's imperial examination is near. As the eldest sister-in-law, you should be more generous. Don't let these yellow and white things damage brotherly affection. He spoke beautifully. Every word seemed reasonable, but I could hear it clearly. He was not asking me what had happened. He was blaming me for not being obedient enough. I looked at him, suppressed the nausea in my heart, and sighed meekly. Husband has misunderstood me. It isn't that I refuse to give it. It's that there truly isn't a drop left in the public accounts. Pei Zhiheng's brows, which had just relaxed, drew tight at once. Lingyi, don't say nonsense like that. Although Yangchang Marquis manor is not rich beyond measure, it still has a hereditary title. How could the public accounts be empty? Are you still angry because I said a few days ago that you smelled of copper? I sneered inwardly, But on my face, I put on an expression of sincerity and fear. I stood and hurriedly bowed. Husband, how could I dare make light of such an important matter? This is the public ledger. Last night, I calculated everything until midnight. If you don't believe me, you may check it yourself. I handed him the true ledger. Pei Jiheng took it casually and turned through a few pages with forced patience. At first, he did not take it seriously, but as his fingers moved past line after line of red deficit notes, his face slowly changed from pale to green. In the end, even his fingers began to tremble. How is this possible? Wasn't there a balance of 2,000 taels last month? And there should be rent from the estates, as well as dividends from the shops. Husband may not know, I said, lowering my eyes. My voice was soft, but every word was clear. Disaster struck the north. The two largest estates outside the capital are both in Kangzhou, and this year they had no harvest. Not only was there no rent to collect, the manor also paid 50 taels from the public accounts to appease the tenant farmers. As for the cloth shop in the eastern part of the city, last month, second uncle withdrew 300 taels from the accounts to entertain classmates. Now the shop cannot even raise the money to purchase new materials. The remaining 112 taels in the account must be reserved for next month's food and servant wages for the entire household. Pei Jiheng stared at the ledger and was speechless for a long time. In the past, because my dowry supported everything, he, the eldest young master of the Marquis manor, only needed to live loftily in the Hanlin Academy. He had never once worried over a single tael of silver. Then, he said at last, "Don't you still have money here?" As he spoke, his gaze drifted unconsciously toward the storehouse behind me. He meant my dowry. I sighed softly and lifted a handkerchief to dab at the corners of my tearless eyes. Husband, I was just about to speak with you about that. The day before yesterday, my elder brother sent a letter. He said father's official salt business in Jiangnan encountered trouble, and the losses were enormous. My brother was so anxious in the capital that he nearly wanted to sell Hengfeng warehouse. I had no choice. Last night, I had people send all the cash and valuables that could be sold from my private storehouse back to my brother for turnover. Now, only a few heavy and clumsy wooden furnishings remain in my private treasury. How could you make such a decision on your own? Pei Jiheng stood in shock, his voice rising. You have married into the Pei family. You are a daughter-in-law of the Pei family. Although the dowry belongs to you, such a large amount of silver is involved. Why didn't you discuss it with me first? Do you still regard me as your husband? Do you still understand the rules of a Marquis household? Husband, calm your anger. I lowered my head, making my voice sound as aggrieved as possible. The law of the Great Sheng clearly states that a woman's dowry is private property from her natal family, and her husband's family may not seize it. If my natal family is in trouble and I refuse to help, wouldn't I be heartless and unjust? Besides, I thought the manor still had some savings, so I helped my family in peace. Who could have known that once I checked the accounts, the situation would be like this? Husband, it isn't only second uncle's gift money that is gone. Mother's birthday is in a few days. I'm afraid that too will be difficult. Pei Jiheng's face shifted between green and red at the mention of the Great Sheng law. He was a scholar who read the classics. He cared most about reputation. Naturally, he could not openly refute the law, but when he heard that old Madame Zhang's birthday banquet might have no money, he truly began to panic. Rest for now. I'll go greet Mother. Pei Jiheng grabbed the ledger and hurried out of the courtyard, not even bothering to change into his official robe. Looking at his somewhat frantic back, I slowly straightened. The meekness on my face vanished completely. Yin Zhu, I said, come with me to Rongxi Hall. Let's watch the excitement. I straightened my clothes and followed at a leisurely pace. Before I even reached the entrance of Rongshi Hall, I heard old Madame Zhong slap the table in anger. Then came Pei Yushu's sharp voice. No money? How is that possible? Mother, sister-in-law must be lying. She's a merchant girl covered in the smell of copper. She's so poor she has nothing but money left. I saw a red coral tree in her room just a few days ago. How could everything disappear the moment second brother asks for 20 taels? She clearly dislikes second brother and is deliberately making things difficult for us. Yushu, shut up! That was Pei Jihing's tired voice. I've read the account books. Every word is true. The public accounts are indeed empty. Something happened to your eldest sister-in-law's family, and her private money has also been used. What about my birthday gift? What about the flower-viewing banquet next month? I already promised the young lady from the Duke of Ying's household that I would wear a newly tailored cloud satin dress. If there's no money, how am I supposed to go out and meet people? Pei Yushu cried, as if she had suffered some great grievance. I chose just the right moment to lift the curtain and walk in, guilt written across my face. Mother, it is your daughter-in-law's incompetence. I failed to manage the household properly and caused husband and younger sister to worry. I knelt in the center of the hall with a soft thud, my eyes reddening at just the right moment. Old Madame Zhong sat on the Arhat couch with a gloomy expression, turning a string of agarwood prayer beads in her hand. When she saw me come in, she snorted and slammed the beads onto the small table. Lingyi, in the past, I thought you were steady and reliable. How did you manage this family into such an empty state? Chengyin needs to visit Honglu Temple. He's doing it for the entire Marquis manor. As the eldest sister-in-law, not only do you refuse to help, you moved all your money back to your natal family at such a time. Do you still have this family in your heart? Her words were truly impartial on the surface, but every sentence accused me of failing to consider the larger picture. I straightened and looked at old Madame Zhong with sorrow. Mother, please see clearly. Your daughter-in-law would never dare delay second uncle's scholarly future. It's only that the money in the public accounts was already used last month when second uncle paid off his wine debt at Zhuxianlu. Now my natal family is in great trouble. If I don't help them, my father, mother, and elder brother may all be brought to court. I cannot stand by and watch my natal family collapse. If mother feels that I am unfit to manage the household, I am willing to hand over the household seal. Mother may manage it personally, or second sister-in-law may take over. That way, I won't have to suffer on both sides and be accused of cheating my husband's younger brother. The moment she heard that I was willing to hand over the household authority, Liu Wenyin's eyes lit up. She had been sitting in the side room, watching coldly until now. Liu Wenyin came from a small family. She had always envied the fact that I controlled the inner household and managed the public accounts. What she did not know was that the Duke's manor had long since become a bottomless pit. She only thought I had been deliberately controlling everything, and that by handing over the seal, I was pretending to retreat in order to advance. Sister-in-law's words are serious, Liu Wenyin said, the corners of her lips twitching as calculation flashed in her eyes. Mother is old and cannot bear such fatigue. Since sister-in-law finds it difficult, then although I am clumsy, I am willing to share mother's burden. I just don't know whether sister-in-law truly means to hand over the seal. I laughed coldly in my heart, fool. She had taken the bait. Old Madame Zhong's sharp, triangular eyes shifted back and forth between Liu Wenyin and me. She loved face and feared trouble. In the past, I had supported everything for her, and she had only needed to enjoy comfort. Now that the accounts were empty, she actually had some suspicion in her heart. She probably thought I was using my natal family's troubles as an excuse and deliberately putting on an act. Ling Yi, old Madame Zhang said, picking up her prayer beads again. Her tone was neither warm nor cold. Your second sister-in-law also means well. Since you are unwell and worried about your natal family, it is reasonable to entrust the household's accounting matters to her for a few days. However, the housekeeper's seal has always belonged to the eldest branch. Even if Wenyin manages the accounts, all expenses must still follow rules. Old Madame Zhong, this old fox, still wanted to keep the title of housekeeper on the eldest branch while pushing all the work onto the second branch. That way, if trouble arose later, she could still find excuses to force me to produce money. My heart saw everything clearly, but I stood and bowed. Mother's teaching is correct. Since second sister-in-law is willing to understand my difficulties, that is best. It's just that the doctor said I need quiet recuperation and must not worry over household matters. Today, I will have Yinju send the seal and account books to second sister-in-law's courtyard. From now on, clothing, materials, firewood, rice, oil, salt, second sister-in-law will make all decisions. I will not interfere, lest she feel constrained and others say, I am unwilling to truly delegate authority. Liu Wenyin was afraid I might regret it. She covered her mouth with a handkerchief and smiled. Sister-in-law, don't say that. We are all one family. I will certainly sort the accounts clearly and will never let mother or eldest brother worry. Pei Jiheng sat to one side and opened his mouth, as if he sensed something was wrong. He knew Liu Wenyin was petty and short-sighted. But when he thought of the deficit ledger he had just seen, and then looked at my pale, unsteady appearance, he swallowed his words again. In his eyes, as long as someone could get through the current difficulty and not affect his studies or official career, it made no difference who managed the household. That same afternoon, Yinju brought 2 maids and delivered 3 boxes of account books, the housekeeper's seal, and the storehouse keys into the second branch's courtyard with great ceremony. Liu Wenyin received them with a radiant face. In front of all the old women and maids, she pretended to be humble, saying she was only helping sister-in-law share her worries and would naturally return everything once sister-in-law recovered. But the smugness in her eyes nearly overflowed. I stood in the corridor, and when Yinju returned to repeat everything to me, I couldn't help laughing. If she wants it, let her hold it tightly. I only hoped she wouldn't come crying back when the time came. Checkpoint, 3,000 words, 20 min at 150 WPM. Less than 2 days later, news came from the western courtyard. Pei Jiheng returned from duty with a sullen expression. The moment he entered the room, I noticed the azure robe on him was actually a little wrinkled. After sitting down, he tugged irritably at his collar, looked at me, and said, Lingyi, do you know second sister-in-law changed the kitchen routine today? I held a silver needle in my hand and was slowly sorting embroidery threads. Hearing him, I did not even raise my head. Second sister-in-law has just taken over. Perhaps she has her own rules. Husband, did you eat well today? Eat well? Pei Jiheng struck the table with his palm. His voice carried a trace of humiliation. The usual pastries in the study were replaced with coarse brown rice cakes. I invited colleagues from the Hanlin Academy to discuss poetry in the side room, and the servant brought out that plate of things in front of everyone. I lost all face before my colleagues. I went to argue with second sister-in-law, but she said the public accounts had no money and that even next month's rice and flour would have to be borrowed from the grain shop. She insisted that every courtyard's allowance must be halved this month. My hand paused. I raised my eyes to look at him, letting the perfect measure of remorse and helplessness appear in my expression. Husband has suffered wrongs. It's all my fault for being incompetent. These past years, I failed to save a fortune for the family. But second sister-in-law is also thinking of the household. After all, the accounts only had 112 taels left. Dozens of mouths in the manor must eat. If we aren't more frugal, I'm afraid the whole family will be drinking the northwest wind next month. Pei Ji-hung choked on my words, his face turning red. He held himself back for a long time before finally forcing a sentence through gritted teeth. Then, don't you have any personal money left? Take some out first for emergency use. Once the rent from Kangzhou is collected, I'll repay you. In my previous life, every time he said this, I would foolishly offer up my private money with both hands, all in exchange for a few false words of tenderness. Now I merely put down my embroidery. My eyes reddened and my voice trembled. Husband, what do you mean by that? The day before yesterday, when my elder brother wrote, I even pawned the pair of red gold pearl hairpins I kept at the bottom of my chest just to make up the amount. Now, aside from a few heavy Nanmu wardrobes and imperial gifted jade pieces that cannot be sold, I can't even find a few loose pieces of silver in my room. If you don't believe me, you may ask Mother Qin to bring people to search. Seeing me cry with such anger and grief, Pei Ji-hung's pride as a noble scholar returned. He immediately lost some of his force and softened his tone. I only asked casually, "Why are you crying? Forget it. Scholars should be diligent and frugal. If it's brown rice cake, then I'll eat brown rice cake." He flung his sleeves and entered the inner room, each step heavy, as if he were trudging through mud. I wiped away my tears and let a cold smile curl faintly at the corner of my lips. This was only the beginning. With Lu Wenyin's temperament, if she did not gain advantages, she would feel she had suffered losses and made enemies. After taking over the account books, she would discover within 3 days that not only was the eldest branch's account depleted, but second Uncle Pei Chungyin's gambling debts and wine debts were the true holes that could never be filled. Sure enough, 2 days later, a quarrel erupted in Rongshi Hall early in the morning. The moment Pei Ji-hung and I entered the main room, we saw Liu Wenyin kneeling in front of old Madame Zhong, crying until her face was covered in tears and mucus. In her hands, she held several fluttering sheets of rice paper. Second Uncle Pei Chungyin stood off to the side with his neck stiff, his expression careless. "Mother, I cannot live like this anymore." Lu Wenyin's cry was sharp as nails scraping across an iron pot. Only after looking through the account books did your daughter-in-law learn that second master ordered a jade guanyin from Jubao Pavilion last month, saying it was meant for the Shaoqing of Honglu Temple. But today, the shopkeeper blocked the manor gate with an IOU for 150 taels. There are only a little over 100 taels left in the public accounts. If we give it to them, the entire household won't even have rice for dinner tonight. Old Madame Zhong had been sitting with her eyes closed, pretending to meditate. But when she heard the number 150 taels, her eyes snapped open, and her fingers tightened around the prayer beads. "Chengyin, what is going on? Mother, your son did all this for his future." Pei Chungyin frowned and argued with complete confidence. "The Shaoqing of Honglu Temple loves antique jade more than anything. If that guanyin didn't please him, your son wouldn't even have been able to enter his gate. When eldest brother entered the Hanlin Academy, didn't sister-in-law spend money for him? Why is it that when it's my turn, and when the second branch manages the household, it becomes extravagance?" Pei Chungyin's words turned the fire directly onto the eldest branch. Pei Ji-hung's face immediately darkened like the bottom of a pot. What he hated most was hearing anyone say that his official position had depended on a merchant woman's money. "Second brother, Be careful with your words, Pei Jihung snapped. I entered the Hanlin Academy through my own articles and scholarship. I never used the money of a lowly merchant to manage my career. Standing to the side, I heard the words lowly merchant, but my heart did not move. In my previous life, hearing such words would have left me hurt and ashamed. I would have comforted myself over and over, telling myself that Pei Jihung was only a proud scholar and did not truly mean to humiliate me. Now, hearing it, I only found it ridiculous. He looked down on merchants' money, yet reached out for it every day. He despised the smell of copper as low and vulgar, yet used that same vulgar copper to pave the road beneath his feet. There was no cheaper person in the world. Seeing that the two brothers were about to start fighting, Lu Wenyin turned her head. Her calculating gaze fixed directly on me. Sister-in-law, you've always been the most sensible. Lu Wenyin wiped her tears, stood, and walked toward me. Her tone was restrained, but every step pressed closer. If second uncle's future is delayed, eldest brother will lose face as well. Your younger sister-in-law heard that although sister-in-law helped your natal family these past few days, the Kui family is rich and still has some foundation. Now that the manor is in trouble, sister-in-law cannot simply watch second uncle be driven to death by the creditors of Jubao Pavilion, destroying the century-old reputation of our Yongchang Marquis manor. The hall became so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Everyone's eyes were fixed on my face. Old Madame Zhang began turning her prayer beads again. Her eyes lowered slightly, and she said nothing. I had seen this method of hers too many times in my previous life. As long as someone could be forced to produce money, she would allow the people beneath her to pressure them. Pei Jihung turned his face aside. Though he did not speak, the tension in his jaw revealed his thoughts. He hated others, saying he relied on his wife's wealth, but he also desperately hoped I would come up with money as usual to cover up this ridiculous situation. Meeting Lu Wenyin's calculating gaze, I let the misery on my face deepen. What second sister-in-law says truly makes me ashamed. I took out my handkerchief and carefully dabbed at the corners of my eyes. My voice was low and slightly hoarse. Since ancient times, when a woman marries, she follows her husband. Her husband's family becomes her fate. If I had even the slightest strength left, how could I, as the eldest sister-in-law, sit by and watch second uncle fall into trouble? But now my elder brother is trapped outside the Ministry of Justice prison because of the official salt case. If we cannot gather enough money to fill the hole, the Kuei family may be confiscated and exiled. At this point, I turned toward old Madame Zhang. My knees softened, and I knelt down. Mother, your daughter-in-law has been worried and did not know how to tell you. Yesterday, my brother sent another letter. He said, the Kui family's businesses in the capital can no longer be relied upon. Today, your daughter-in-law was planning to return to the room and arrange for the few servants the Cui family sent into the Pei household to be withdrawn. They can return to the estate and make their own living, so they won't waste the Marquis manor's public rations. Second sister-in-law says the Kui family has a foundation, but in the end, we are still a merchant family. Heaven's power is unpredictable. Liu Wenyin had not expected that not only would I fail to produce even one coin, but I would also use this chance to cut down the staff supported by my family. She choked at once, her face turning green. Pei Chengyin sneered. If you don't have money, just say you don't have money. Why speak so much nonsense? A merchant family is still a merchant family. When the critical moment comes, you only care about your own tiny plot of land. You have none of the backbone or responsibility of a noble house. Presumptuous! Pei Jihung could no longer endure it. He slammed his palm onto the small table and glared at Pei Chengyin. Your eldest sister-in-law has been in this family for 2 years and has never owed you anything. You drink and gamble outside, pile up debts, and still have the nerve to bite at her here? The 150 taels you owe Jubao Pavilion have nothing to do with the eldest branch and nothing to do with your eldest sister-in-law. Pei Jiheng's anger was not to protect me. Rather, Pei Chungyin's words about the backbone of a noble house had struck the eldest son's face like a slap. Now that all public accounts were in the hands of the second branch and Pei Chungyin's spending had become outrageous, Pei Jiheng feared the creditors would truly cause trouble outside the government offices and ruin his reputation as an editor of the Hanlin Academy. Enough. All of you be silent. Old Madame Zhong finally opened her eyes. Her sharp gaze swept over everyone before landing on Lu Wenyin. Wenyin, you are now managing the household. Since Jubao Pavilion's creditors are blocking the gate, the reputation of the Marquis manor cannot be thrown away. Doesn't the public account still have more than 100 taels? Use it first. As for the remaining balance, return to your room and think of a way to make it up. Mother! Liu Wenyin cried out, her whole body nearly collapsing to the floor. If all the public money is used to repay debts, what about this month's allowances for the entire household? What about the servants' daily expenses? What about Yushu's clothes and jewelry for the flower viewing banquet next month? Those haven't even been prepared yet. Pei Yushu, who had been sitting quietly to the side, immediately flushed red when she heard this. Second sister-in-law, what do you mean? Second brother spends money outside, so why should my share be cut? At the Duke of Ying's flower viewing banquet, so many famous young ladies of the capital will be watching. If I wear old clothes, how am I supposed to lift my head in front of them? I don't care. My new dress and red gold headpiece must not be missing. What kind of behavior is this? Old Madame Zhang was so noisy that her head ached. She slapped the armrest angrily. Yushu, you are a daughter of the Marquis manor. Every word and action should follow rules. How can you shout before your elders over a few pieces of clothing? Then she turned to Lu Wenyin, her voice colder. Wenyin, this matter is settled. Since you accepted the duty of managing the household, you should know the difficulties of being mistress of the house. If you could not bear it, you should not have accepted the seal in front of me in the first place. Old Madame Zhang's words completely blocked Lu Wenyin's retreat. I lowered my head to hide the sneer on my lips. In my previous life, when I managed the household, whenever the public accounts ran into difficulty, old Madame Zhang would say the same thing lightly. You manage the household. Think of a solution yourself. Again and again, she had forced me to open my private coffers. Now that this feeling had fallen on Lu Wenyin, I wanted to see how long her thin dowry could last.